my name is Chrissy. I am a librarian at the Kennebunk Free Library, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to make a basket out of newspaper and glue and cardstock. So, a couple of things you're going to need. You will need scissors. You will need a very thin, long implement. I have knitting needles, ergo I am using a knitting needle. If you don't have knitting needles around your house, you can use a skewer. Pencil is probably a little bit thicker than you want for this purpose, but take a look around and see what you have. The longer and thinner, the better in general. You will also, obviously, need some newspaper. If you don't have newspaper, you can use magazine or other types of paper. The bigger, the better, and you'll see why in a minute. It's just going to make your life easier. You will also need some sort of cardstock. You could also use cardboard for this. This is going to be the base of our basket. I made mine into an oval because that's the shape of the basket that I want. This is going to be the bottom of the basket. But if you wanted a circular basket, that's fine. I have not tried it using squares and other shapes. That might get more complicated in terms of making the bends be pretty. If you want to do that, feel free to try it. So, first things first, how do you make a newspaper into something that resembles a reed or something that you can weave a basket out of? First off, you take your sheet of newspaper, you cut a long strip. You could also rip this if you are confident in your ripping skills. But you want to end up with a strip of paper that is as long as possible. Whichever way makes it longer, great, do that. Put that over there. And now you need to roll this, and here is where your long, thin implement comes in. So you want to start at one corner, it does not matter which one, but you want to put your knitting needle at an angle and then roll it up in the newspaper as tightly as you can. This takes some practice. My first several attempts, I didn't do it tightly enough, and then it just kind of like spewed out everywhere. That's fine if it takes some practice. But you want to put steady pressure down on the knitting needle, I'm going to call it for the rest of this because that's what this is, and then roll it up. And you'll see the newspaper is also being rolled up in there. And as it goes further and further along, as the roll gets further and further along, you can move your fingers up to keep them kind of on as much of the roll as possible, but making sure to keep near-ish the top, because that's the part that's most likely going to end up too loose if you're not careful. So, now that I have it rolled, this is where the glue comes in. You could use a glue stick, you could use glue. I have glue right here, so I'm going to use glue. And you just want to put, you do not need a lot, just like tiny little daub of glue, and roll it the rest of the way up. If you need to put a little bit more glue on because you didn't put quite enough on or put it not far enough along, that's fine. And it's okay to get glue on your fingers at this stage. So now you can take your knitting needle out, and you have a lovely long thin thing that looks a little bit more like what we need, which is great. This step of the process is going to take a while. I would suggest trying to do it while watching a TV show or a webinar or doing something or listening to an audiobook where you're just doing something mindless with your hands after it becomes into your muscle memory, and then you will have a lovely, enormous pile of them, which I have done in advance because you really don't want to sit here and watch me do this for an hour. So now we need to actually start figuring out how to construct our basket. You've got your two cardstock pieces. Again, these can be whatever shape you want. The larger your basket, the longer it's going to take, and the more materials it's going to take. So bear that in mind when choosing how big to make it. And depending how tall you want it, you can potentially take a bunch of these and cut them in half if you don't want a basket that's a foot tall. That will make your materials stretch longer, which is what I am doing. So I have a bunch of these that I then cut in half. When you cut them in half, you might need to put a dab of glue on some of them because there isn't glue on that piece anymore once you've cut it. But you'll see pretty quickly that they start to unroll, and then you just glue and do that. In fact, I can show you with one that I didn't do. So if they've sat there for a couple of minutes, they will start to kind of curl over onto themselves even when there's no glue there. But it's good to reinforce that you do actually want that to stay down. So we're just going to do that. And then let that dry pretty quickly. I'm using glue that dries really quickly, so I'm not really too worried about wet glue getting everywhere. So, constructing the base of your basket. You want to take one of these, set the other one aside for now, we'll come back to that in a second, and put your spokes. These are going to be the spokes of your basket going up, which you will then weave in and out around. So you want to put your spokes around, meeting kind of in the center, because that will give more structural stability to your base. But you want to make sure that the spacing in between the spokes at the edge of the base is about the same. You also, super important note, which I forget half the time when I do this, need to make sure that you have an odd number of spokes for the particular pattern of basket that we are doing. I am sure that there are basket patterns that require an even number of spokes, but it's not the one that I know, and thus not the one I am teaching you today. So make sure that you actually count things before gluing them down, or else it's going to make a headache for you later. All right. Okay, so this is 17 around here. Don't know if you can totally see, but I'm going to mess it up if I try to show you right now before I glue it down. So I'm just going to glue it down and then I will hold it up and show it to you. So this here, before the glue dries, is when you want to make any sort of last minute changes, adjustments to exactly how far apart each of your spokes is. I'm not going to raise this up to show you until it is totally dry, so hang on a second. So this is a delicate step. I would not suggest picking it up at this point, but I do want to show you that is what my basket looks like right now. So let it dry as much as you like, and now we want to put the top on. This is mostly to protect the structural integrity of this so that it doesn't just all fall apart. Use glue liberally here. You just kind of want to put a whole bunch of glue all over everything. And then pop it down so that the two sheets of cardstock are making a nice little sandwich on top with the spokes in the middle. And at this point, let everything fully dry before trying to do anything else, because until it's solid, you really don't want to try bending these upward, which is going to be the next step. Okay. I think it is close enough to fully dry that we can go on to the next step. So, right now, we have a thing that looks like maybe an avant-garde clock? Who knows? This does not look particularly much like a basket, though. So what we want to do next is, at the point where each spoke comes out of the base, put your finger down and then bend that spoke upward. Do that all the way around. It's okay if they don't stay, but this is just going to help us later when we are trying to weave things in and out and make them stay this way. I want to do all right. Now you want to take one of your other things we have not done anything with, your other reeds, I'm going to call them, and figure out which side which is the inside, shall we say, and pick a spot and glue it down. Just with a little dab of glue, doesn't need to be fancy. I'm going to pick this spot. You want this to be at a slight angle. You could also put it underneath, which might actually be neater if you care about what the bottom of your basket looks like. If you're going to have it full of things and you don't care, you could put it on top here. So, right now it's primed to go on the inside of this spoke. You can see a little bit. So it's going inside here, and then we want it to go outside the next one. So bring it up the next one. And make it bend slightly around that spoke. Leave the next spoke where it is. We'll catch that one on the next go around. But bend the one after up so that it goes on the outside of that. You're going to weave every other one on the outside. So leave that one, but make sure that gets caught up. Leave that one, make sure this one gets caught up. And you can do smaller shaping, kind of pinch the newspaper to make it a little bit curvier if you like. Leave that. Okay, what to do when you have reached the end of your weaving material. Well, first I'm going to add a little bit more glue over here because I apparently didn't add enough the first time around. The good and bad news is that the first 2 rounds of a basket are the most difficult because you're doing a bunch of the shaping right now. So it gets easier, but you need to get through the first 2 rounds. So, what I want to do, I have this end, there's a little hole in it because the whole thing is hollow. I'm going to take another of my reeds, put a little bit of glue on the end, all the way around, and push the new end into the old one. If the new end is larger than the old one, you do that in reverse. But you want one of them to end up, overlapping one of them inside the other. And now you can keep going. It is probably a good idea to wait just a second when you're doing this to let it dry for a minute before continuing to pull, because otherwise it might pull out. Alright, so I'm going to keep going. With my every other. And now I'm back around to the beginning. And if you'll notice, the one that we went on the outside of the basket for, you are now primed, because you went on the outside of the one right before it, you are now primed to go on the inside of this first one we went outside for. So that it looks like that. You've got the first round we went outside, this second round we're going to do the exact opposite of whichever we did the first round. So anything you went on the outside of the basket, you now want to go on the inside. Anything you want on the inside of the basket, you want to go on the outside. I should also mention at this point, you can shape your basket in different ways. If you want it to go straight up, you want to try to make these as straight up and down as possible. If you want it to go inward, pull things a little bit tighter than you otherwise would. If you want it to be shaped outward, leave things a little bit looser than you otherwise would. But as you go along, pay attention to how tightly it is woven, because that is going to affect whether it goes straight up or out or in. And any way is fine, just depending what you're hoping the basket is going to be at the end might make a difference. Alright, so I'm at the end again, and I'm going to do the same thing that I did before. I'm going to grab one of my newspaper reeds. I'm going to figure out Unfortunately, they're about the same width, both of them. So I'm going to put some glue there. Stick that inside. And you want them to overlap by probably an inch or so. Another thing to keep in mind is, if you'll see, I'm trying to keep my weaving as close to the base as I can. That's just to help with trying to keep everything neat and tidy and not unraveling in weird ways, because this is still pretty amorphous in terms of its shape can easily be changed. The first couple of rows especially, you want to make sure that you are tidying as you go, let's say. So occasionally I'm going through and pinching the newspaper to make it a little bit more bendable for around these edges, especially where I'm curving more sharply. So now you just keep going around until the basket is as high as you want it. Okay, so how to end your basket when it is about as high as you want it, which I think this is. If you have leftover reed that you are actively weaving into things, cut it with a little bit to spare, and then you can tuck it into one of the previous rows. What I would do is tuck it, I'm going to turn this around so you can see it a little bit better. So right now I have this one, which if I were to keep going, I would go behind. And so instead of going behind and then coming out the other end, I'm just going to tuck it straight back behind and secure it with glue. But I'm not going to tuck it all the way behind. I'm going to tuck it in front of the actual spoke, but behind the previous row's reed, so that it ends up right there. And I'm going to glue it that way. There might be more elegant ways to end baskets. I'm sure that there are, in fact, but this is the way that I have figured out, and so this is the way I'm going to teach you. So now that's there. You can let that dry if you like, but then the next step is to finish off all of the top bits that we haven't actually woven anything on yet. So what you're going to do is first look at each one and figure out whether the last row of reeds was on the inside or the outside. What you want to do is make sure that you're going to fold these over, and you want to make sure that you fold them over the last row woven to finish it off. So for example, if I've got this guy here, I don't want to fold him this way because that leaves my reed up here orphaned. I want to fold him over the last reed that goes past him. I'm actually going to cut off a little bit of each of these ends because there's still enough that it's going to be annoying to work with. So what I want to do is fold it over, put a little bit of glue on this if you want to make it extra secure. What I'm going to do is fold it over and then fold it down into the second to last reed that is on the inside. So if you can see closely, we've got the first reed, let's see, first reed there, second reed is there. What I'm going to do is fold it in and then down inside that last bit. I'm going to show you on one that is outside because I think that's a little bit easier to see. So for example, this next one over, I'm going to fold it out because that covers the last bit that was woven. And then cut it shorter. So it's folded over this one, and then I want to push it so that it's folded truly back on itself inside this reed here. So over this one, into this one. So it looks like that. The end is underneath this reed here. And then you go around and do the same thing for each of these. I find it helpful to kind of pinch the top to kind of crease it a little bit. That will make it less likely to spring back. Okay, so there's your basket. That whole thing took me just about an hour to complete, given that I had already pre-made pretty much all of my reeds. So it will take a little bit of time, but once you get the hang of it, it's not too bad. And you can use this for anything. I have heard that you can paint them. I have not tried, but I don't see why you couldn't. Or you can just kind of leave it as is. And I hope you enjoyed.